Welcome to the Chronic Hope Institute podcast, the only podcast designed for the families of those who are struggling with addiction and codependency. If addiction has rocked your household and you don't know where to turn to get support, then this podcast was built for you. Our host has written the book on how families can navigate the scary world of addiction. Chronic Hope, Parenting the Addicted Child, and Chronic Hope, Families and Addiction can both be found on Amazon today. We invite you to connect with us on Facebook, as well as subscribing to the Chronic Hope Institute podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Now, here is your host, author, therapist, and CEO of the Chronic Hope Institute, Kevin Peterson.
Let's roll.
Hey, everybody. Welcome. It's Kevin Peterson, the host of the Chronic Hope podcast, here on Friday, July 2nd, 2021. The Chronic Hope podcast is the only podcast dedicated to helping the family that's struggling with addiction and codependency. And our job is to give you solutions and help you put out the house that's on fire. And today we are honored to have just an amazing person with us, Heather Henretig from Ocean Recovery down in Southern California. And Heather's going to share a little bit of her story and talk about how families can get help and how her family helped her. And without any further ado, I'm going to say good morning to Heather. And hi, how are you?
Good morning, Kevin. I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm truly honored.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm so grateful that you're here. And, you know, I just think the world of you, and I think the world of the work you do. And without any further ado, I want to jump right in, and I want to go right after the topics and the conversation that we're going to go and engage with. And the first question is always kind of the same. And the first question is, how did you get sober?
Yeah. So when I was in my disease, I got sober about 11 years ago. And had been spiraling out of control for a good 10 years prior. And it got to the point where my mom and my dad decided that they were not going to facilitate my addiction, but they would facilitate my recovery if I was ready. And I wasn't ready for quite a long time. But when I finally reached my bottom, I did reach out to my parents and said, okay, I'm ready, I'm done. And at that point, I think they were kind of scrambling to know what to do. Where do we send her? There weren't as many treatment programs or resources out there as there are now. And so luckily, when I was in the kind of depths of my disease, my mom started a blog about being the parent of a heroin addict. And through that blog, she met a lot of other parents. And that was her way of gaining a community because she really didn't know how to cope with I think reconciling how her, educated, daughter who had everything going for her, how did she become a heroin addict? And through that blog, she met a lot of other parents, and then she also met a lot of other professionals. And so she reached out to an interventionist she had met through her blog, who then recommended a treatment center, a women's program for me. And 4 days later, I was on a plane for Southern California.
Wow. And so that was in 2010?
2000. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So you had said earlier, I want to go back a little bit. You had said earlier that your mom and your dad had kind of gotten to a point where they weren't going to engage with you in your addiction anymore. What did that look like? How did they come to that conclusion? And then how did they approach you exactly?
So, I think, for a long time, my parents thought that bailing me out my crises, whether it was a financial crisis, whether it was, my car, getting pulled over and my, tags were expired. And so my car had to get towed, or what. I was constantly in crisis. And for a long time, my parents, I think, thought that bailing me out of every crisis was helping me. And the reality was that it was not helping me. It was not allowing me to reach my bottom. And it was prolonging the inevitable of me getting help, because I always knew they would bail me out. And so I think my mom started going to Al-Anon and seeing professionals, seeing a therapist, and they started to draw boundaries. And it finally did get to the point where I knew I couldn't call them for money. I knew I couldn't. I knew I couldn't go, come over to their house. I knew that, if I, really the only, interactions I had with them were kind of few and far between. I think, really was for them to just make sure I was still alive and breathing. But I did know that if and when I was ready, that they would be there to help. And finally I was.
So what I'm hearing you say, and I love this, by the way, what I'm hearing you say is that your parents set some boundaries and they had teeth in the boundaries. Yep. They didn't just say it, yep. They actually yep. held their ground, and they got help for themselves.
Yes.
And
yeah.
The other thing I loved what I heard you say, because this is one of the things that I always tell the people that I work with, is you have to stop bailing them out, because what you're doing is preventing them from feeling their consequences,
right.
And when you started to feel your consequences, that's when you started to look for help.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think the, throwing money at the problem, or, feeling like, you're, no parent wants their child to suffer. I think there's something innate in every parent that, it's, you obviously don't want your child to suffer. But at the same time, not allowing them to suffer and feel consequences, doesn't allow them, when you feel enough pain, you change. And if they're not feeling enough pain, then there's no reason to change. And so, I think, I certainly got to the point where I was living in pain for quite a long time, and very isolated from my family. I realized that, I had two options. I could stay where I was, which was miserable, or there was this mustard seed of hope, that maybe there was another way to live life. And I went with that mustard seed of hope.
Which your parents effectively help you get to, because they stopped enabling you. And now I'm curious, and because one of the things that the families that I work with, when I explain that process to them, what their response is, but if I do that, they could die. Right. And what is your, I know what I like to say, but what would you say to a family that comes to you and says that?
I think my response is really that, you're actually helping them die by continuing, by not allowing them to reach their bottom. And it seems counterintuitive to a parent when of course no parent wants their child to die. But you can not help enable that death by setting boundaries. And when you set boundaries, when the family system changes, then this addict over here is also forced to change. And unless this family system changes the way that they're interacting with the addict, nobody's going to heal.
Absolutely. And I have to tell you that I had the exact same experience. My father, in 1990, we were driving from San Luis Obispo to San Francisco. And in the first 5 minutes, he said, Kevin, you're my only son and I love you, but you're an alcoholic and a drug addict and a liar, a cheat and a thief. And until that stuff ends, you're out of the family.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing that your parents and my parents did also, they said, when you want help, we will help you. They didn't just slam the door on your fingers and say, get out and go fix yourself. They said,
Right.
And like your family, my parents had received some professional help along this process and said, draw a line, tell him you're willing to get him help, but until he's willing to get help, he can't be part of the family. And you know, it took me about another month, 2 months to respond to that because I thought I'd test it and see what happened. But I'm here the same system, and that's exactly the system that I outline in my books and in my talks, and I know it's the same system you guys follow at Ocean Recovery. So take me from you got sober, you went to treatment, and now tell us what you do, where you work, and your title. I mean, just tell us everything. And how you work with families today.
Yeah. So I got sober. I started working in the field, you know, as like a tech. And I became really interested in working in the profession. I became very passionate about it. And now I'm the Senior Vice President of Strategic Development for Ocean Recovery. We're located in Newport Beach, California. We've been around almost 2 decades. And we are a gender-specific long-term program. Our women's program treats substance abuse and co-occurring eating disorders, and our men's program treats substance abuse and trauma. We're typically a 90-day program, and you know, do an amazing, incredible job of not only helping our clients, but also doing a lot with working with the families. And I really, you know, I think you and I were talking a little bit earlier before we started that a lot of parents, you know, drop their kid off at treatment and they expect, you know, if my kid changes, everything's going to be fine. And the reality is that the entire family system has to change. And if they're not involved in the process from the beginning, whether it's, you know, weekly therapy sessions with the client or, you know, getting treatment on their own, when that child comes back to that same family system, if the family system hasn't gotten better, the loved one is going to go back to their old ways. And so we work a lot with the families throughout the entire process of making sure there's a shift, a dynamic shift, so that when the loved one does come back into the family, or it moves back in or what have you, it's not the same dynamic that was there prior, because that never works. And I always recommend a family also, you know, work with a professional like Kevin, or a professional on the front end, like an interventionist, because, you know, you said, you know, we were talking about families not wanting their children to die. No parent wants their child to die. But I think involving a professional who can be an outsider and who not only can support the family, but can also relay a message to a loved one in a way that sometimes family members can't, I think is very, very helpful. So that's why I always like to involve someone like Kevin or an interventionist in the process, because it alleviates so much pressure for the family.
Yeah, and the family, you know, I love what you're saying, because the family is navigating new territory for them. I mean, for you and me, this is an everyday occurrence, but for the family, this is a brand new concept, and they feel lost. They've tried everything, and they've gotten nowhere. And hey, we have a couple of comments. I'm going to read them off. Charlie Anderson, a buddy of mine, probably a buddy of yours too, who lives in the great state of Michigan, says, "Thanks, Kevin. I love listening to the way you articulate. Thanks for all you do." Thanks, Heather, as well. "I appreciate your story and your perspective." Thanks, Charlie. I love that. That's fantastic. And then Christian Farr also said he loves this, which I thought is really cool too. And I love. And by the way, if anyone's watching and they have questions, you can message in the questions, and Heather and I will do our best to answer them. If you're a family member and maybe you're watching this afterwards and you have a question and you want to know more about what we're talking about, you can email us. You can go onto the group and put a message onto the video, and we'll be happy to answer. Heather and I will both be happy to answer you and help you in any way, shape, or form through this process. Can you tell me a little bit about the family program that you guys offer at Ocean Recovery?
Yeah, so we offer, first and foremost, we offer weekly family sessions with the loved one. And we always involve, when we're talking to family members, we actually always involve the client in the conversation. Because we really want our clients to start taking ownership in the relationship with their families. So in addition then to the weekly family work that we do, we have a 3-day family program where the families all come together. And we provide them with psychoeducation. We allow them to get to know each other so that they have a support system, which is so important. We're encouraging our clients to find their support system, whether it's through AA or some other, fellowship, so that they, when they leave treatment, they have support. But the family members need support too. And so we really encourage them to lean on each other for that and get to know the other parents and call each other when, they're suffering or their loved one may have relapsed, or because if they don't have support as well, it's overwhelming, I think, for the families.
Yeah. Well, and like I always say, is if it's good for the addict, it's good for the family. If creating a network of people that are fighting the same battle, absolutely. So, okay. So the title of today's episode is "What is California Sober?" And I got sober in Southern California, although I live in Florida now. And you got sober in Southern California. And we both obviously recently saw Demi Lovato come out and say, I'm California sober. It's okay for me to drink and smoke weed as long as I'm not doing heroin or harder drugs. And I think that's probably very confusing for family members, because they're trying to figure out what a proper boundary is and what that looks like. Tell me what your thoughts are, and just be candid.
When I heard California sober for the first time, I honestly didn't even really know what that meant. I later came to learn that I think it meant you could smoke a little pot or use occasionally. I know all I can speak for is for myself. I know that I'm an addict, and I cannot put a substance in my body because I know where that road leads. Which is usually a needle in my arm. And so it is a very slippery slope, I think, when we're talking to especially young adults who, may be using harder drugs, but have access to alcohol, now have free access to marijuana. And let me just also say, this ain't your mom and dad's pot anymore. We are seeing unbelievable levels of marijuana-induced psychosis now, not only at the treatment centers, in the hospitals, in the psych units. I work with so many professionals who are, they really don't know what to do, and the parents don't know what to do because their loved one is really has really lost their mind because of the marijuana. And the high levels of THC that are in, both the edibles and the smokable, as well as, the vaping. And so I think it's a really slippery slope. For me, I come from an abstinence-based model where, if you're sober, it means that you're not partaking in any mind-altering substances, period. It's kind of all or nothing. Now, that being said, I think there is also a lot to be said about MAT.
Why don't you explain what that means?
So medication-assisted treatment, it is, anything from psychopharmaceutical medication to Suboxone. And the reality is that yes, it's saving lives. Yes, people need access to certain medications that can help them not only get over the hump of recovery but also save their lives. And so I think there's also a lot of controversy around, whether MAT or MAT treatment is sober or not. And the reality is that I think we need to take all approaches to and give all access to people who are suffering from substance abuse.
I would agree with you when it comes to medically assisted treatment. I have to tell you, initially when that first, I came out, I was thinking, oh, great, we're going to have one big giant methadone clinic in the world. And I understand the value of Suboxone and some of the other psychoactive drugs as well, and how they can help people come down. And for the families that are watching, what we're talking about is in the last 5 or 10 years, there's been a wave of drugs that have been available that help people taper off benzodiazepines, opiates, and heroin, and by using a drug that kind of mimics and lowers the impact. And the ultimate goal is to taper down off that drug as well. But there's definitely been a lot of controversy inside, because you've taken someone that's using a drug in an addiction fashion and supplying them with another drug to sort of stair-step them down. And we are definitely seeing results with it. And so, again, if you're a family member and you're sort of wondering, oh my gosh, here's the situation, what do we do? That is definitely an option to take a look at. I wanted to say that, back to what we were talking about with the California sober concept, I'm with you in the sense that I come from a position of total abstinence, and that where that comes from for me is that like you said, you know that you're an addict, and I know that I'm an addict and I'm an alcoholic. And what that means is that I never am going to regain control over the drugs and the alcohol. And again, I'm speaking to the family members that are trying to figure out what we're talking about. Going to treatment and being sober and getting education for a certain amount of time is not going to change the fact that I react differently to drugs and alcohol than the majority of the population. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, absolutely. And I also think that, there has to be a complete lifestyle change as well when you get sober. Yes. And if you are still partaking in marijuana or drinking occasionally, then you really haven't changed your lifestyle or your friend group or your community. And that part is just as important, if not more so, for long-term recovery. And I think family members really need to understand that, it's you really have to. If you don't change everything, then you change nothing.
Right. Oh my gosh, exactly. I mean, I couldn't have said it any better. I think that's wonderful. And I mean, I really love this. This is so much fun. I would like to spend all day talking to you, but I know we both have lives.
I know.
But I'm going to get to see you in a couple of weeks, which will be fun.
I can't wait.
But I think, I love the fact that you've addressed that your family was critical in getting you sober by holding boundaries and sticking to those boundaries and having a solution, that's important. And that you work for a program that engages the family throughout the entire process, and that by changing the family dynamic and changing the entire family system, you can actually, that's the best way to support the addict or the alcoholic. So, any last thoughts before we sign off today?
Oh my gosh. I think I feel so much for these families who are feeling so helpless and overwhelmed. I guess my only message is that there's hope, and to seek out a professional like Kevin, find a community, find other parents, go to Al-Anon, and really seek help for yourself. And once that's done, believe it or not, your loved one will soon follow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you 100%. And that's one of the things that I always think is a surprise for the families that I work with, is that they want to spend their time talking about the addict or the alcoholic. And I'm like, yeah, we're not going to do that. We're going to talk about you and how we can change you and fix you. And that's really what the best way to help the family system is. Okay. I just happen to know that am I wrong? Is there somebody in your house that's celebrating their first birthday soon or recently?
Oh, yeah. No, my son just celebrated his first birthday last Friday. These are the gifts of recovery. I got sober and I went to treatment and I started working a program, and I found a profession that I'm passionate about, and I met my husband, and I now have a child, and it's incredible what happens when you start working a program, and I'm so grateful that I made the decision I did, and I'm so grateful my family finally stopped enabling me because it really allowed me to feel the pain and want to change.
Yeah, motivate to change. So last thing, how's your relationship with your family today?
Oh my gosh, it's incredible. I have a beautiful relationship with everybody in my family, and my mom, even 11 years later, still goes to Al-Anon and still has a community. And she really looks at herself as being in long-term recovery too, even though she's not an addict. It's addiction affects the entire family. And everybody's sick in a family with addiction, even if you aren't the one with the addiction. And so, I'm grateful that my family is still seeking help for themselves, and as am I. I have a wonderful relationship with my family now, so I'm super grateful.
So again, to give hope to the families that are watching, you can hold boundaries with your family member, your loved one that's struggling with the addict, drugs and alcohol. You can make sure that when you hold the boundary, that you have a solution for them, so that when they do ask for help, you can do that. And then you can take care of yourselves. You can engage in communities of other families that are struggling with the problem. And then on the other side of the spectrum is that there's with sobriety, the family can get reunited, and you get grandchildren.
That's right.
Which is such a wonderful story, and I adore you. I'm so proud of you, and it's a pleasure to be your friend.
Thank you. I feel the same. And, I'm so grateful that parents and families have a resource like you, Kevin, out there. And I wish you had been around when my parents were, 11 years ago, when there just weren't the resources there are now. And so I'm so grateful and that you're there advocating for these families and are offering a solution.
Oh, thank you very much. It's my pleasure. And so that's going to wrap up our show today. Hey, if you don't have time to sit down for an hour and make an appointment with myself or one of my colleagues, we do offer a video course. It's 1 hour. It basically talks about how to handle someone before intervention or treatment, during the treatment period, and then how to reunite the family. It's only $37, and that would normally be about $100, or in session it'd be about $150. And so that's available on the website. So are the books Chronic Hope, Families in Addiction, and Chronic Hope, Parenting the Addicted Child. They're on Amazon, Kindle, and Audible. And then we also have an Instagram page, a Facebook page, a Facebook group, and an Apple podcast. And so please subscribe to all these. That helps us get the word out. Those are all free, and our goal is to help families for free as much as possible. We have a couple of quickies, things that come in. Kristen Ott says, "I'm watching and I love you, Heather." That's so sweet. And then Barbara Luce from here in Jacksonville says, "Glad you're posting this. Callie sober is definitely scary." So, all right. Hey, gang, thanks for watching. Heather, thanks for being here. And, have a wonderful 4th of July holiday.
Will do. Thank you so much.
Okay, talk to you